Welcome to another episode of Ryco Workshop Heroes. I'm Luke Oxley and today we're here at Jaunt Motors in Melbourne where the team are doing something I've never seen before. It's electric restomods, I'm not even sure. Let's go take a look. Dave, where are we? Big facility.
Yeah, so this is our electric vehicle workshop where you can see we take old classic cars and we make them electric essentially, as well as a lot of cosmetic and aesthetic upgrades as well, and we'd probably call it remanufacturing for some of the cars. So something like these series Land Rovers, that is every nut and bolt changed. Some of the other vehicles, it might just be a motor transplant, a drivetrain transplant, but these it is nut and bolt, redo everything. How do we take this vehicle and rebuild it in a way that doesn't take away the feel of it? And it's really tricky to describe. We make them kind of what you imagine them to be, not what they are, because the reality of what a 1950s Land Rover is a lot worse than you remember and a lot worse than most people want to drive in 2025. It's just not practical. There's people who, they can double clutch with the best of them and do this and they've grown up with it or they're experienced with it. For most people, most of the time, this is a terrifying thing in stock form. So we can take it and go, okay, right, we can improve obviously the throttle feel by putting an electric motor in there, but we can improve the braking, we can improve the electronics, we can improve all these things, because what we're trying to build is a, maintenance-free, accessible, as in anyone can own the car of their dreams now without having to be a mechanic.
How did you start with a Land Rover? Was that something you guys come up with, or did someone come to you originally with one? Or?
So I have been a Land Rover owner for a long time, and I always wanted one electric. Well, that's kind of where it started. The other reason for Land Rovers is there is an iconic shape to them, and there is this sort of nostalgic understanding, whether you grew up on your uncle's farm learning to drive in one, or you saw them in a documentary on Africa or something. They just have something about them that of course other vehicles do too, and other four-wheel drives do too, but Land Rover has also some kind of balance where there's the right mix of curves and straight lines where it's both kind of tough and cute. We're not trying to sell a conversion service. We're actually most of the time selling a car, and a car like this is really a family decision. But we find that families love these kind of vehicles. It is not just a car for the one car enthusiast member, it's a car for everyone and a car for everyone to enjoy. But then the other big factor was there's a lot of them. So in the 60s, the story is 50s and 60s, Australia was buying about half the Land Rovers being made in the whole world. Every government department, every farmer. Then Toyota came along with a car that was a bit more reliable, a bit more powerful, better dealer network, all the reasons that we buy Toyotas. And everyone put the Land Rovers in the back paddock or the shed, and being aluminium, they didn't rust or go anywhere. And so now there's still thousands of them out there.
Let's look at some of the tech stuff on it. This has actually got like regenerative brakes and a lot of stuff you'd see in a late model electric vehicle.
Yeah, so I guess there's two aspects to this. One is like, how do we repair this vehicle to make it not falling apart and have giant rust holes in? So you can see this chassis has been repaired and then been galvanized. But then a lot of other aspects that you can see here. So the braking system, electronic brake booster, disc brakes all round, new 12-volt system is all to bring that car up to what you imagine it to be. So for example, disc brakes, we could pass current brake testing, engineering compliance nationally with well set up original drum brakes. But you've got to keep adjusting them and you've got to do this. You've got to be kind of not necessarily a mechanic to adjust a drum brake, but you've got to know that you've got to adjust your brake, which is not the ownership experience of any car these days. But it's also that for most people, putting your foot down on the pedal of a four-wheel drum brake car feels like broken brakes. Like it just, you can feel them all, and yeah, sure, if you know that that's what you're expecting, but it feels weird for most people. So discs are also, in the long run, cheaper for us as well. It's so much simpler to install these than set up the drum brake and everything with the quality of components we can get. So then you're going from a four-wheel drum system, and even things like this car would have come with a single circuit, unboosted brake system.
Yeah.
So of course we're going to go dual circuit. And then of course we want to add boosting because you want, if you've made the throttle go great, you want the brake pedal to feel good too. But instead of just adding, say, a vacuum pump, because of course the electric motor's not creating vacuum, We've gone down that road in the past, but we found that it's much better, and again, cheaper for the customer and better to just jump past the 70s and 80s and 90s and go all the way to an electric brake booster that gives much better throttle control, is a much more powerful system. We've got CAN bus comms for any errors that might come out of it, and it's a more compact thing as well, and it's cheaper.
Yeah.
So it's really that sort of generational leap. We're not trying to build the best car of the 90s, we're trying to build this combination of kind of 50s and 2025. This is what we'd call our Generation 2 platform that we're now doing across all our vehicle ranges. And the big step change for us, and really the whole EV conversion industry, was going from tech that was almost like golf cart stuff, forklift stuff, like souped up, to full OEM grade, 400 volt, modern car performance level equipment. When we consider like all our cooling system is co-developed with PWR, so we provide them with all the specs. They're amazing engineers up there in Queensland, do all the modelling for the cooling system, providing something that fits and bolts into an original Land Rover radiator panel, but then it's cooling a modern 300 kilowatt motor, battery pack during DC fast charging. We work with, ARB are doing the shocks, so they're redoing Old Man Emu shocks for series Land Rovers. But even things like the drive shafts from the electric motor to the axles, we worked with Hardy Spicer, did all the modelling. So now we have a CV and a double cardan joint, amazing modern technology like CVs, but for an old 50s Land Rover, it is. So an amazing collaboration kind of with Australian Automotive to again, bring as much tech as we can to this, to give you a car that you can comfortably drive at 100 k's an hour, do whatever you want to do with it, drive it every day, but still feels like a Land. Now, where that fuzzy border is, when do we take it too far? That's the subjective element, but yeah, a lot of work.
Okay, inside the car, the packaging is incredible how small it all really is, but give us a bit of information about what's going on here.
Yeah, so one of the other reasons to choose Land Rovers was that big rectangular sections are really easy to work with, and of course old ladder frame vehicles, or even new ladder frame vehicles, make that a lot easier. Body on frame is fundamentally easier. Yeah, cramming everything in, even though the motor is quite small, batteries, all the other tech we've got to put in is the real challenge. So what you can see here in the middle is a Tesla Model 3 or Model Y rear drive unit. In the Tesla, this would have been rotated 90 degrees, and the output would have been to each of the rear wheels. So this has been rebuilt, re-geared. So instead of a 9-to-1 reduction straight to the wheels, it's 4.5-to-1 reduction internally, and then that drives diffs with a further reduction. It's also got what is essentially an LSD in there, so that you've got constant all-wheel drive. Okay. Then this single reduction, the idea of a single reduction gear is apart from a few rare exceptions like the Porsche Taycan, the most common way that any EV works. A single gear reduction takes the high RPM, in this case 16,000 RPM potentially, and brings it down and multiplies the torque, of course, and makes it really usable at that normal drive speeds. What you can see around it, of course, is I want to call it sort of normal automotive stuff. We've still got to keep the motor cool. The motor though runs at maybe 60 degrees where it's happy. So cooling for the motor, anything orange is high voltage. So we've got to put orange cable in orange conduit. So all these cables down this side are from the charge port over here. So original fuel filler location, 3D printed metal surround that's now modified, down running into the battery pack. And then you've got the cables coming through into the junction here that then connects the motor. You can see what we've also done. It's a little bit harder to see, is obviously we've got to mount that. So we do a new bolt-in cross member at the front that supports the motor and supports the battery. New cross member or new mount points around it. It's a 3-point mount on this motor. All of those things have to be engineered. And so that means full sort of digital crash simulation, FEA, all this work to prove that anything heavy that we're putting in a new spot. Now that would have been a transmission mounted there.
Yeah.
We know the chassis is strong enough, but we've got to prove our mounting is strong enough, particularly when it comes to the batteries and accounting for 20 Gs of frontal impact.
That is, so most new EVs, obviously the batteries are generally in the floor.
Yeah. So this is the challenge of classic car conversion, is just fitting everything in. So if we were to, and we get these questions all the time of like, oh, why don't you do 4-wheel motors, hub motors, to do all this stuff? There's a lot of stuff that is very cutting edge tech that it's great that there's a press release, but it doesn't mean it's in a way that would be any way feasible for us to use.
But do you really need it in something like this?
Well, you don't need it. Like, that's the thing. It's like 4 motors is 4 times the cost. So how about 1 motor?
It's also extra weight.
It's weight. So, and this is where we get into what fundamentally changes this car. For us, this is a leaf-sprung solid axle 4-wheel drive. Its off-road capability comes from those solid axles. Like, that is still, 70 years later, one of the best ways to create a 4-wheel drive. If we were to create an independent suspension system with dual motors and whatever, like a Rivian might do, or a Cybertruck, then when is it just this shell? When is it a Land Rover shell on a different body? For us, keeping those solid axles is inherently part of this car, which then dictates other compromises, which means all the batteries are going to go in the front.
So how big is that battery?
55 kilowatt hours.
Yep.
So we do 2 options. That's the standard but small battery pack. We also can upgrade the batteries to live in, the seats would be here, and we can put batteries in the seat box and double that battery capacity. With that capacity in the front, so 55 kilowatt hours is it's on the small side, but there's a lot of new EVs you can get with that same capacity. All of those cars, however, have great aerodynamics. This does not have great aerodynamics. So what we're fighting against here is just the fact that this is a brick. And in fact, a Land Rover has a worse drag coefficient than like a perfect cube would. There's too many protrusions and all this stuff. So what that manifests as is around town, like under sort of 60 Ks an hour, up to maybe 80. So around town and off-road, you'll get 250 kilometers of range out of this. At highway speeds, that probably drops to about 150 kilometers to 200. Yeah. So the faster you go above 80, like, you're fighting the wind, that's all you're doing. So it is not, although it's got fast charging, we're not expecting, and no one's really buying a series.
So you're not driving it across Australia like a lot of
technically you could, but I don't think anyone's really seeing
buying us to do that.
60s, 70s Land Rover as their main cross-country.
So how does it weigh? Like, its weight distribution?
Yeah, so the weight distribution, or overall weight, I think we're about 50 kilos heavier than stock. Now that includes things like, for most of the cars, like soundproofing, you can see in the doors here, soundproofing, leather trim, air conditioning, like a lot of other stuff as well. So we're only a little bit heavier. If you double the battery pack, of course, that adds weight. The great thing, of course, with any 4-wheel drive is these had huge payload. You're not anywhere approaching GVM. It's really hard to do in these. Even a short wheelbase had about an 800 kilo payload capacity. So even though the fact that we can now do, and you can see that the height here, we don't have a transmission coming up like this, so we can do a flat floor through the front, genuinely get 3 people across the front, people in the rear. Even then, you're not approaching GVM. The weight balance is an interesting one. We do have all the batteries up there, but the nature of 4-wheel drive like this is the axles are really far forward. So that battery is still behind the front axle. So it's not exactly that all the weight is at the front end. It's actually the weight distribution is, I think it's within about 10% of what stock would have been.
So what power is this making versus factory?
Versus factory, yeah. So this motor can deliver over 300 kilowatts. Theoretically, we don't give you that much power in this car. So we give you at most about 200 kilowatts. And I say that, I'm sort of not hesitant, but I'm saying that in a bit of a weird way because we deliver that in the right way through software. If you put your foot down, it is always just a little bit on the verge of fun and scary. we give you the appropriate power for this car, and it's about how fast we deliver that torque. Compared to stock, I mean, what was the stock? I think like maybe 40, 50 kilowatts, maybe.
Yeah.
But obviously a lot of, had a lot of very different gear.
The flatline torque that's makes them so different.
This is, so in our first generation system where we were using electric motors into original gearboxes, that took these cars into something that you could keep up with traffic. It was very much an old Land Rover with an electric motor. This is now something else. This is a car that can, that is faster than a lot of cars out on the road and can keep up with anything, and go faster than I guess the handling dynamics really want you to go.
Let's have a quick look at the Patina one over here. I love your badge on the back.
Oh,
it's
cheers.
a really nice touch.
These badges in particular on the fenders there. At certain eras in Land Rover history, they would have had like a Leyland badge or something there. But what we found is that you'd pull up at the lights and people would look at it because they've seen you drive a bit faster and whatever. That is I'm stopped at the lights, and people next to me can look over and go, oh, is that electric? It helps open that conversation.
So this one is the same. They're both the same?
These are both the same. These are two good examples. One where this customer, we helped source a car with them. They wanted a classic Land Rover electric, we helped source a car. These customers that owned this car for quite a few years, driven it around, enjoyed it some of the time.
But they probably had a bit of a sentimental attachment to it.
They did. So that's why this isn't getting a repaint either. Yeah. You know, it's odd for us. These are the first two Patina builds that we've ever done. They both happen to be at the same time. So yeah, this car has personal history and we've rebuilt it. This car was bought specifically for this application. Yeah. So went to a place called Land Rover Heaven in Melbourne, where they have hundreds of Land Rovers in a field of all eras and generations. And this was, we have not, most of the external body panels are just as it came off the farm.
Very
super
straight.
So straight. How did it, like?
It doesn't even have like any little dings.
This wear makes sense. The other side has a lot more rub to it. So this is maybe UV wear, something. This car is again 58, and it was I think it was number 18 of the diesels. So it's the 18th diesel Land Rover that ever came into the country. So it has a little bit of history there. And what's interesting then is was like, oh, you've destroyed, this car had significance. And okay, maybe number 1 had significance. What about 2? What about 3? What about 18? When do you start to go, there's enough of them? But what's interesting, I think, is that
But if they're all just rotting in a field.
If they're rotting in a field, what's the point of them, for one? But what happens usually is for every Land Rover that we build, probably another couple of Land Rovers also get built from the benefit of that. So in this example, we had number 18. Someone got in contact with, and I posted about us having the 18th diesel. So I get some hate, but then we got someone saying, oh, I've got number 19. What I don't have is an engine. So what are you doing with that engine? And we're like, oh, fantastic. We'll get you that engine. And so those not matching, but now the 19th diesel Land Rover is back on the road and running for the fact that we created this. So in here now we've just got some protective cloth on. From the outside, it's just an old Land Rover driving around, but you get in and it smells like a new car. It feels nice, all the touch points are nice. You can see things like we do, you know, a new warning light cluster. So that's all new electronics by us, a CAN bus warning light cluster that gives you all the EV information. You can see the aircon vents over there. There's one on each side. A Land Rover of this generation didn't have anything. So it didn't even have a heater. So it had no demist. So even having vents, now that we've increased power and torque, we've got to have a demist system to make it compliant. So even things like, from a design perspective, how do we do a demist vent that looks era correct? And often with the Land Rovers, it's easy to over-design because the cars were so brutally simple. And it's like, what have we got in the workshop? And in that case, it was like, yeah, a couple of bits of RHS, mill some holes in them, bolt them in. They look like they should be part of that car because they had patina from just being in the workshop for a few years. There isn't necessarily a jaunt design aesthetic about trying to overdo this stuff. The best compliments we get is when people thought that, oh, they had these vents originally, or they had a stereo originally because we've integrated it.
Even the interior, it just looks like it's rejuvenated. It looks brand new, although, but it looks old.
Yeah, right. And so, I mean, and you look, Land Rover, of course, was never going to option, herringbone and leather, but even the color palette, kind of, it's not incorrect. And having a little door card just means that, we're always chasing little noise and vibration and different things, which sounds like a crazy thing on an old Land Rover, but it's,